that is greater in the impact on student learning. There have been studies recently that have shown that in lifetime earnings for the student, there is a significant measurable impact as between even a poor-performing student, poor-performing teacher and an average teacher. As much as $250,000 per classroom can be aggregated from the work of an average teacher as compared to a poor-performing teacher. College attainment can be impacted, and life prospects more generally. There are many indicators, including plain old learning growth, that show that teachers are such an important factor. But I want to focus you on three numbers, 100, 23, and 14. Let's start with 100. And let's think about ourselves in the context. Now, as I began my presentation, I talked about us in the context of the country. It's not just about our internal problems in our state, which are significant. It's relative to the country. But also I want to focus on the international scene. Because the fact of the matter is that economically and every other way, Connecticut is not just competing here, we're competing with regions and jurisdictions abroad. In some of the systems that are most often pointed to as the highest performing in education among national systems in the world, if you look at South Korea or Singapore or Finland, which are frequently pointed to as exemplars, 100% of the teachers entering the profession are from the top third of their graduating classes in college. 100%. Now I want to be clear, I'm going to make some comparisons. I'm not saying that GPA equals effective teacher performance. Not in the least. All of us know people who are very, very bright, who would make terrible teachers, and know of other scenarios. I'm going to make a different kind of point, so I want to debunk that before it's even out there. But 100% in Finnish society, in Finland, of the individuals entering teaching are in the top third of their graduating classes. What that says is the way in which society respects the profession, the way in which it's valued, the way in which it is rewarded, the fact that it matters. In the United States, it's only 23% that are in their top third entering the classroom. And in high poverty schools, it's only 14%. There is something going on in our society. Do we value teachers as much as we do doctors and lawyers and bankers? Do we represent that in any fashion? Think about it. There are a lot of features and factors in that dynamic. There's money, to be sure. Salary cannot be overlooked. It must be a part of the equation. There's the notion of a career ladder. How can I advance in my career as I progress as a professional? Does the profession answer that question at present, the teaching profession? And there's a horizon in such a profession, and it's an extension of the point about the career ladder. When will I be able to attain a leadership position in particular and reach, let's say arbitrarily $100,000, the $100,000 mark in my career? And when will I be viewed as having really hit that horizon? Is it conceivable? I would argue that in today's teaching profession it isn't yet, but I would argue that on every side of the discussion, management and union alike, there's interest in advancing these points. But the unfortunate reality is that there are vast misperceptions of the teaching profession. When we think about that top third of college graduates, what are they thinking about as they look forward to the future? And they try to invest in these reforms that we describe so dramatically with their own personal investment of their professional time and energy. What do they think about? Well, more than half of top third college graduates believe that teachers earn about the same amount of money as a sanitation worker, as a garbage man or a garbage worker. Now, I should argue, and I want to be very clear here as well. I think sanitation workers should be paid more. And I think it's an extremely important profession. But the reality is, it's not true. It is a misperception. In the United States, the wages for sanitation workers are in the 30s, and in the wages for teachers, the salary for teachers, it's in the 60s, on average. 30s versus 60s. But the perception is otherwise, and I think that there are many aspirations that are appropriate for young people. And again, I think that there are many things about multiple municipal professions that need to be improved. but what are we doing to create the right perceptions and the right realities about the teaching profession? There is a saying in South Korea, which is, don't even step on the shadow of a teacher. Don't even step on the shadow of a teacher. But one of the things that I fear is that in our zeal and in our advocacy for reform, which we must only increase, we must only become more vigorous, there's a sense in the teaching profession that teachers are being bashed, that they are not respected. It's going in the other direction as pertains to recognition and the sense of respect that will be afforded to one entering the profession. Whereas other professions, MDs for example, receive special treatment in the receipt of driver's licenses, the MD plates or the doctor's plates. Where's the teacher plate? Would we even conceive of these kinds of distinctions and these notations for teachers? Now, don't get me wrong, a license plate or a kind word will not change the profession, but I'm giving you a whole picture. Compensation, career ladder, preparation, and distinctions like this. Now, let me speak of preparation. For too long, there has been a neglect of the way in which teachers are prepared. We have done a lot now around, you've heard the array of reforms. We're very proud of them. We're a long way from having completed their implementation. A lot of them are focused around accountability, holding accountable to results, and evaluation, which really brings that same movement to the classroom level for teachers. I think we are moving towards the point where we're going as far as we can around accountabilityizing and evaluating ourselves to success. We must pursue it much more vigorously, and we must do so in these years of austerity, which is challenging. But we also must find a way to attract the best professionals into the teaching profession in general, and to prepare our young entering professionals as best we can. There's been a long history of rhetoric about our teachers' colleges, about our higher education institutions that train teachers and train school leaders. But there's been too often inaction. The accreditation rules at the State Department of Education in Connecticut are not the subject of reform, have not been the subject of reform for a very long time. But we're pleased with the fact that in partnership with higher ed, we are gearing up something called the Educator Preparation Advisory Council. You may know that that's the same letters I used for the evaluation group, that PEAC or PEAC. New rule in Connecticut, every organization needs to use those letters. But the Educator Preparation Advisory Council is going to look at the accreditation mechanism we use for higher ed to ensure that we are preparing the best for teaching. That's just one of the steps we're going to take. Much more has to be done, building upon some of the things that New Haven has invented, and that Bridgeport is now working on, around the establishment of real career ladders and real leadership positions for teachers, and a real trajectory for growth, and real respect in our state. But we have much more to do, many more ideas to mull and to mine, and we would value those from you. So as we think about reaching, I want to linger on the 100%. Reaching 100%, not just in the sense that I described of who's entering the teaching profession, of how we treat the teaching profession, but also where we stand as a state. Are we in the top percentage of states in closing the gap in overall performance? I was thinking about the magic of teaching, and I was thinking about my own background, which happens to have been as an undergraduate in psychology. And I took a number of classes in the brain, in neuroscience, because I thought it was fascinating. I wanted to understand how do children develop? How ought we create systems that support effective child development? There's a book called The Mind and the Brain by Jeffrey Schwartz and Sharon Bacon. And I was perusing it recently. I am a bit of a geek. I acknowledge it. I was perusing it recently, and there's a story. This will seem a bit off the mark, and this is my conclusion, so you're aware. It will seem a bit off the mark, but there is a musical prodigy who was playing the piano at age 5 named Martha Curtis, who's named in this book. And Martha Curtis suffered from very severe epilepsy. And it would affect her actual performances. She would be in some of the finest performing venues in the country as a youngster. And she would actually suffer epileptic seizures. And it used to be the case that neuroscientists and surgeons believed that the right remedy was something called corpus callosum, which is to actually separate the two hemispheres of the brain. That didn't seem to work in every case, because the origin of the seizure in the brain tissue itself might not be as related to the connective tissue between the two hemispheres. What scientists began to realize is that you could actually excise portions of the brain. You could actually conduct surgery where you remove portions of a hemisphere all the way up to an entire hemisphere of the brain. And the brain was moldable, it was mutable, it would adjust, neuronal networks would realign, and things like remarkable musical talent would reestablish itself in the brain. The young brain is a remarkable thing, and Martha Curtis had one such operation. Didn't work. She had a second such operation. She had a third operation. She had a substantial portion of her right hemisphere removed. And she emerged, and she decided that she wanted to play boxing as her first action when she was back on her feet, and she performed it marvelously, perfectly. And the full adjustment had occurred in her brain. And the scientists involved in these operations, they commented that because the real estate that the brain usually zones for musical memory was essentially unusable, the brain, exploiting its youthful plasticity, picked up and moved its musical operations across the neural road. And then they conclude that for the very young, their neurons haven't decided what they want to do when they grow up. Now, I described this experiment about the removal of half of the brain, a little bit bizarre, I acknowledge, because I know all of you are thinking, often when you meet me and you interact with me, if he had half a brain, well, I just want to know, if I had half a brain, I'd be doing just fine. But I also want to observe the magic that is the human mind, and especially when the brain is young, when the mind is young. Children have this plasticity in their brains and potential regarding their future that is really limitless. And the system that we create for children ought to recognize that, ought to invest in that, ought to make the realization of that potential a guarantee for all children. We ought not have gaps. It is possible for all children, and there are exemplars throughout our state, throughout our country, that show it's true. Individual schools, even in schools that appear to be failing, individual classrooms, where it's happening, where the gaps are closing. Ladies and gentlemen, we've gotten started with this array of reforms, but we have a long way to go, and I applaud your commitment to them. And let's make this kind of miracle more routine for young people every day. Thank you very much.
Stefan, that was great and inspiring in terms of the commitment of the Illinois administration, your leadership, the governor's leadership, what's happening in the state, and the fact that this state has committed itself to the education of our young people in ways we haven't seen before. So thank you for that, and thank you for all that you're doing to say